Gillian Fagan Cully is owner at Acora.ie. She is a psychotherapist and joins Miriam O'Gara on Business Block. Business Block is powered by the Women's Inspire Network, founded by tweeting goddess Samantha Kelly. Well, hello everybody. Another Monday today on Business Block. And as you may already know, if you're following the shows, Monday is Women's Inspire Day. This show is powered by Samantha Kelly's Women's Inspire Network. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have Gillian Fagan Cully. Acora Therapy is not the only company, though, that she runs. We'll be bringing up Rainbow, we'll be bringing up JCI that she's involved with as well. So there's a lot to discuss today. So Gillian, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Delighted to be here. First
of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Oh gosh, I'll give you the shortened version, or we'll be here all day. I worked in a corporate world for 20 odd years in risk management and finance mostly. And when I was younger, really younger, I wrote a letter to myself saying I wanted to be a writer or a psychologist. But then life happened and I wanted to earn a salary. So once I finished my Leaving Cert, I went straight into work. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I think 18 is so young to set out your future for the rest of your life. I did very well. I worked, back then the company was Royal & Son Alliance. That was my first big job. So I was kind of in insurance, financial services, 21 years before finally realizing my heart lay in being self-employed. I was in a company, and I remember my cousin is, I think she's also an Inspire member, Paula, she's the quarter life coach, was sitting on my balcony, and I said to her, oh, this manager, such and such, I need to move, I need to do up my CV, I need to get my CV out there again. And she said to me, do you ever notice, Gillian, you're the common denominator in everything that's wrong with the jobs you have? Maybe you're not fit for this industry.
Yeah, that's hard talk.
Only family can talk to you like that, huh? But she was right. And it took me a while to make the move, but that was the catalyst to where I'm at now. I went and used a redundancy package to completely retrain. I trained as a psychotherapist and a counsellor, and I then trained as a life coach, a couples therapist, a family therapist. Look, all the things. We're not here to list my trainings, but
so what is the difference between a psychotherapist and a psychologist, for example?
A psychologist does the assessment and diagnosis. So if you need any kind of assessment or an actual medical diagnosis or something that declares you have a particular mental health issue or disability or neurodivergence, a psychologist will do that assessment and diagnosis. A psychotherapist basically is the talking cure. It's talking through and talk therapy and looking at helping you support yourself.
And how different would that be to cognitive behavioral therapy?
CBT can be done by either or both, but generally it falls under the realm of psychotherapy.
Okay, it falls under that realm as well.
Yeah, but many psychologists can also train in it.
Now, as we have up there, you're an award-winning psychotherapist. So just tell us a little bit about that.
I set up my own private practice in 2016, Acora Therapy, and I couldn't meet the demand for the services that I had. I guess given some of my personal hobbies and interests, I was familiar with a lot of things that wouldn't be so mainstream. For example, LGBT clients, people with autism, neurodivergent people in open relationships, any kind of sexual issues. So I was attracting a particular group of clients that went well above and beyond, I'd say, standard therapy. So the demand for my services, I just couldn't meet it. So I launched a second company under the name of 2019. So we have a therapy centre that's online and based in Cable Street, Dublin city centre. So we have 8 therapists there now, and that we have only recently been accredited the Business All-Star. The Irish All-Star Business Accreditation. So yes, we are an award-winning inclusive therapy centre.
Fantastic. That's amazing. And did you identify your niche market very early?
No, my niche market identified me.
Right. Okay.
I This might be a bit controversial to say. I don't believe personally in having a niche client or a client avatar or an ideal client specifically. My whole thing, and I guess I'm an autistic woman myself, so the whole thing around inclusion is so precious to my heart that the idea of leaving your services inaccessible to people just wasn't okay with me. So I never pursued a niche market. I just had particular friendships, particular interests, particular experiences that my niche market were able to find me. And I knew a certain language, like talk about diversity and inclusion. I do corporate training on LGBT at work, inclusion at work, neurodiversity at work. So given, I guess, the language I spoke, people sought me out for that reason.
Can you just for a second there, you've mentioned something I was going to raise as a point later on. Neurodiversity, what exactly does that mean? And how would it affect the workplace?
Oh, well, all diversity means is difference. That's it. It's not this big mystical word that people seem to think it means. Diversity, we're all diverse, we're all different. Yeah. But what happens in workplaces is people's differences aren't often accommodated to, and there's a lot of bias, discrimination, and I guess look at Ireland, how much it's changed. Each decade, we're in a very, very different landscape.
Yes.
In some workplaces, particularly older, settled, fixed type of environments that aren't as innovative and as dynamic, that can present problems because you've got younger people coming into the workplace with different ideas, different views, different values, different beliefs, and it can cause a lot of conflict. And I do remember a particular company I worked with, the question was, well, why do the gays need pride? And that was the way it was phrased to me. And I'm a bisexual woman, so jump in there. That's like waving a red flag to me. But so the why it needs training and why it needs awareness is really just so we can all get along, but to accept and make way for people who do have differences. Like as an autistic woman myself, there were things in the workplace that perhaps I needed that weren't accommodated for. I didn't know at the time I was autistic. I got diagnosed quite late. But when you can provide diversity training and inclusion training in workplaces, it just helps people really understand how we're different and how by embracing a dynamic, different culture at work, you can have much more innovation, much more like people throwing their ideas into the pool, like diverse conversations, creative ideas, and really enhance the whole performance of what the company is about, regardless of what you do.
Yeah, I completely understand that. How do you feel as an educator as well, looking at the media and how the media, for example, is dealing with such things as autism? And what pops into my mind, I don't know if you've seen the television series The Good Doctor, which was the Korean show.
I haven't seen that one. No.
It's very, I don't know if anybody has Sky, it is actually quite interesting because they're bringing into a medical environment a situation where someone could be very heavily discriminated against as a surgeon if they are autistic. And in this case, this particular person is on the more extreme end of the spectrum, but is a wonderful diagnostician and is determined to be a surgeon, and they keep trying to block him. This sort of thing does go on in life. So is like how, when you go in and you do your training, would you expect to find in your workshop people who are already suffering discrimination, or who might be perhaps not necessarily to do with autism, but perhaps even to do with being in the LGBT community, or who would be very, very reluctant to come out and even use the term queer in the workplace or anything like that? Are you expecting them to be there, or do you actually deliver your presentations presuming that you're starting from zero and that people have no knowledge, the people in front of you have no knowledge of what you're going to be talking about, and introduce the terms then fresh?
Generally, I start from zero because even if we know everything, like I don't believe in the term expert at all. Show me an expert. The idea that you've learned everything you can learn in your field, I just don't buy it. So I always start from zero, but I use, depending if it's a 1 hour talk, that would be a fairly sort of agenda template. But if it's a longer and it's a workshop, I get very, very quickly the feedback on how much information is already in the room.
Yes.
So while I start with definitions and an understanding of what is, for example, what is autism? Let's talk about neurodiversity. Let's look at what that involves. I often, well, always would set up an anonymous survey that's ongoing throughout a workshop. So when I ask, does anybody know somebody who is, does anybody themselves identify as, and then I bring it outside of just the particular topic. I always ask, has anyone here ever felt discriminated against? 99% of people, regardless of what the talk is on, has experienced personal discrimination. Yeah. So it makes it relevant and why this is something that we should be learning about. We all experience discrimination. 99% of us, and I once had a talk that I did and one person said no, and because it's an anonymized survey, I got an email afterwards from somebody saying, oh, I accidentally pressed the wrong button on the thing. So I wondered if that was that, but generally 99% of people have experienced discrimination at work. So I start from zero and very quickly assess the amount of information or the awareness in the room, because when you're starting from zero, it's much more inclusive. You're paving the way then for even just understanding the terminology. If you don't know what you're talking about, how can you come up with solutions?
Yes. Yeah. Now, what as someone, dare I say, expert, consultant, as a consultant in the area, and who you know you're having to work with terms. What's your general view of labels? And you know, I often ask myself, okay, we're using a lot of these labels we're using them quite heavily now, and particularly in social media. Where, I wonder, will this be? Question I ask myself is where will this take us? Sort of 20 years from now, 25 years from now, will we get to a point where we don't have to use the labels anymore? Is that even a thing?
I don't think so. I completely, I have mixed views on labels. I completely get what you're saying. On a personal level, I'm not a fan of labels. However, I can understand the need for labels. Labels help people find their tribe, their community, access the resources they need, find specialists who can maybe provide particular healthcare or psychological care or even just community care. So the idea of labels, and I can see it even with LGBTQIA+, like there are always, I was doing a workshop on Tuesday with a colleague and we were talking about gender identity. And I think as of Tuesday, if you Google gender identity, I think there are 78 different genders, 78 labels to describe gender identity. It's always going to increase and grow. And the problem labels can present is sometimes it can feel like it's othering or segregating as well. So rather than this whole idea of us all being in it together, it's well, those people over there with this set of labels. But when I work with diversity, rather than focus on the label of, like, even like I said, LGBT, like there are many sexual and gender orientations, and that because I guess sexuality and gender are becoming more understood as a spectrum, it just leaves a lot more room for anybody to create a new word or a new label. But if that helps a person explain their identity, feel individual without feeling that they don't fit in, and find perhaps other people who are like them, well then the label is not a hindrance in that respect. Where the label is a problem is where people look at all of this labeling and think, oh, I'm going to have to learn off all of these things to show that I'm an ally. And that's not the case at all. And I have had people say, what's with all of this? And it's been called alphabet soup. Whereas you don't really need to know every single letter under the LGBT kind of acronym. If you call it LGBT, that's okay. And that's what it's commonly kind of accepted as. And same with neurodivergence. What are all of these labels? What does this even mean? There's autism, there's ADHD, there's Tourette's, there's dyspraxia, dyslexia. There are so many other things. And again, the labels. But if you're talking about inclusion, the labels in some ways really do matter, so you can make space for people who have been oppressed or minority or that media has left behind. But the other side of it is, if you look at things through what I call intersectionality, the intersectional lens, where one label might have an oppressive or a burden or obstacles in society kind of whole stigma to it. if you have another label with all of this burdens and obstacle, if you just treat diversity as acceptance for everybody and come at it in this intersectional way, being aware that in an age of individualism, we all have so many different labels to describe ourselves. Like, and diversity exists. Diversity isn't going anywhere. The diversity awareness is increasing, but the future is diverse. The future is different. There's no denying that. So I don't think labels are going to go away, but I think we can do a lot of work on understanding rather than resisting a label, to just embrace it and just say, yeah, okay, difference. What can I do to include that? It doesn't even really matter about all of the different identities. What can I do to include you?
So just returning to the company and when you set it up, when did you set it up exactly, Acora Therapy?
Acora Therapy, 2016.
Right. Okay. Now there is a second. Say it again.
It's still shiny and new, really. But we've.
Now there is a second business that you run. Tell us about that.
Under the Rainbow. Under the Rainbow was set up 2019, so it's even shinier and newer. And when I was working as Acora Therapy, given that, as you said, the niche, just the specialized interests that I was working with, I was working in a therapy center where a lot of the therapists were working on similar kind of issues. But I was doing corporate talks as well. The first one came via my sister. They were supposed to have someone in for wellness week. They let them down. She knew I knew this stuff, kind of rattled it off. I was giving the family enough lectures. So she gave me about a week's notice and said, can you fill in? Since then, I haven't gone a month. Well, actually, that was back then. Now I haven't gone a week without doing some sort of formal corporate training. And I now train other therapy centers. But when I began to do the training as well as the therapy work, me as a sole trader, So I approached a fellow therapist and I said, I have had this idea for a business since I was a child. I actually had the name Under the Rainbow since I was a kid because I loved, my grandmother used to say, you can't have rainbows without storms. I loved rainbows. So when you have days, like the weather's been so bad lately, when you have days where the rain is bad and the weather's bad, chances are you might get a rainbow and then it'll be worth it. So for me, rainbows meant hope. And in Ireland, everybody's seen a rainbow, right? We have enough rain here. So I set up this company 2019 in a coffee shop with a gay man and a transgender woman. We were having brunch and I told them about this business idea I had. I wanted to provide inclusion training, eventually run an inclusive therapy center and expand beyond what I did, but provide that safe space. So I said to both of them, do you want to be on my board? Let's do this thing. They were both just sitting there saying, okay. That was March 2019. Within 2 weeks of us setting up, we were training in Maynooth.
Oh,
yep, on transgender awareness, and we literally haven't stopped. We thought that COVID was going to destroy us, but COVID's actually, maybe it wasn't COVID, perhaps it's just I am incredibly dynamic, blame the ADHD. We went online and we're now international. So we've gone from a team of 3 to 14 in those 2 years.
Oh my gosh, that is a success story.
We're going to have to expand again, to cope with the demand for what we do.
Isn't that absolutely amazing? Well, congratulations. That is absolutely fantastic. So at the moment, is Under the Rainbow taking up more of your time just now and more of your work day?
It is and it isn't, because Under the Rainbow is a startup and my poor husband's out in his dad's at the moment. We got married in 2017 and we were planning a home renovation and that we got cash gifts for the wedding. So it was sitting in an account, and in 2019, we were about to start the home renovation and I said to him, can I take that money and start a business? And well, when I have my mind set on something. So that's how it started. It was self-funded. So I have waived any income for me for the first 3 years being a startup. So I have to give Acora Therapy my primary focus, so I have income to pay the mortgage and pay the bills and still finance and fund Under the Rainbow. So it's kind of a 50-50. I guess both of them are full-time jobs.
And have both of them now, in the 14 months since the pandemic started, become totally online?
Yeah, mostly, yeah. The odd time there'll be a client session in person, and particularly with COVID, I'd work with a lot of people with terminal illnesses, so sometimes there'll be home visits and things like that. But for the most part, yeah, both businesses have gone completely online, and it just means the training that Under the Rainbow provides has become international and is so much more accessible now as well.
Now, with regard to other areas that you give counselling in, so you'd be working in the palliative area as well from time to time. What about mental health care?
Yeah, what has happened over the last year and a half, it's going to change who we are as a society and who we are as individuals. Mental health is really not doing well. I genuinely don't know anybody. I know my business is thriving, but I genuinely don't know anybody who is absolutely thriving and flying it at the moment. Personally, we have experienced grief beyond what we're even able to name right now. So our mental health is suffering. And aside from like the whole diversity and inclusion piece, yeah, I work a lot with people I work mostly with anxiety actually, but redundancy, job insecurity, imposter syndrome, relationship, so I guess you're bog standard counselling, if you can say that.
Yeah.
But like I trained as a corporate mental health ambassador as well. So I would do a lot of with companies, mental health, vicarious burnout, stress at work kind of stuff as well. Just on that piece around managing remote work, what's work-life balance when it's work-life integration? Of working from home, not everybody can do that. If you've got a family and you're at your kitchen table and you don't have the luxury of a spare bedroom that can become a home office, like it's just so unequal on an individual level, and how the working from home situation has impacted us. And then people in services, retail, entertainment business, like there've been a lot of job losses as well.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. And also just working out working on your patience, because I know, for example, in my situation, when work literally stopped on the 11th of March last year, and I had to kind of switch from doing gigs as a singer, and also I corporate trained, but for international, foreign national managers, etc. All of that stopped. And then suddenly you've got to think about, well, what can I do that I don't need to upskill for, but that can be done from home. And when you've identified that, which can already take a little while, you've then got to identify what your schedule is going to look like. I mean, I've realized that I can't do interviews any earlier than about 2:45, that it just doesn't work for people, but that more than anything else, because everybody's online now and working online, that is the best time of day to get a connection on Zoom or whatever platform I'm using that isn't broken, and that just takes time to work out. Then you add into that the general stress of what's going on, your own mental health as it is at the moment in your own family and whatever's going on and who you have to manage apart from yourself. And really the demands are, everything has become microcosm, hasn't it? It has just reduced down, and you've got to rise above it somehow. Pat yourself on the back and say, well, gosh, I have actually survived 14 months. I thought I was going to die in the first 6, and then just say to yourself, all right, we've got here. Got here. We actually have a blueprint for pushing on, but still, having got all of that sort of clear in your mind, the house might still be a mess. The office or the studio that you have might still be totally disorganized. There's still so much to do. At the back of your mind, you've got so much to do. And you start applying extra pressure to yourself then.
I know.
And so just learning, getting in touch with the right people. And I mean, it sounds to me as though you're absolutely the right person and worked off your feet perhaps, because you are, but finding the right people who can give you the mental health support, who can catch you. I mean, I know from my point of view, I'm someone who was diagnosed with PTSD years ago in my 20s. But guess what happened about 3 months into this pandemic? Bang. started to, having not had any difficulty at all for ages, suddenly it started to come back. Suddenly the nocturnal panic attacks started to make an appearance again, just knocking on my door and saying, hey, I'm still here. And that was a little bit of a life lesson, because I think if you think that something that you have peaked with in the anxiety and stress sphere, if you think, even though it's years ago, it might have happened and it's never going to reoccur again. Oh yes, given the right circumstances, it can. And we're very good at forgetting that can happen. So I'm sure that people like yourself have been so busy in the pandemic. Have people been in contact with you with pre-existing issues and have said, this has come back, what do I do now?
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned PTSD. I would do a lot of trauma work, particularly around work and sexual trauma. And those two areas are not overlapped at all, but they just seem to be the most areas where trauma presents itself in what I do. Our unconscious minds have no sense of time at all. So as soon as that whole, like, look at what's happening. We've never, ever experienced such a global threat. Like, even 9/11, there was still this panic and threat, but it still felt, well, at least in Ireland, that it's over there. Whereas this is every single country. We have never had such a global threat. And like last summer, there was such a panic around the not knowing what this was going to look like. Because in April last year, May last year, we were all sitting in our gardens, loving the sun, loving the lockdown, not really taking it seriously, a bit of a DOS. This is only a few weeks. And when it began to roll into June, people began to kind of say, oh, hang on here. And the panic when you went to the supermarket, the panic when someone came too close to you, on a very unconscious level, it felt like our very existence was being threatened.
Yes, so, because it was an invisible enemy.
So any previous traumas, anything that triggers and gives us this perceived threat or perceived danger to our existence, even if it's not real, and COVID is very much real, but well, even if it's not real, it triggers unconscious trauma. It triggers things that you have healed and worked through and dealt with, because our unconscious mind has no sense of time whatsoever. And then if you're going into that fight or flight mode, everything floats up to the surface. So yeah, I've had that a lot, particularly around sexual trauma in the last year. And people are saying, I'm not going out. I'm not feeling threatened. I'm not sitting in bars. Nobody's saying anything to me. But this is coming back. And again, the night terrors, the panic attacks, the anxiety, the sweat, the imposter syndrome, everything that goes with it. It's horrific. It's just so, and yet, I'll tell you one thing though, Miriam, our minds, I absolutely just cannot learn enough about why we are the way we are. I think it started trying to figure myself out. Still working on that one. But I think it's actually magic how resilient human beings are.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you totally. It's a miraculous little world in here, isn't it?
Yeah. And we're incredibly resilient. And I when I even feel like I get anxiety myself, I'm human first, like to remind yourself of, look at everything I've survived. No matter what, you're a survivor. And sitting here today, having endured, as you said, we've gotten through the last 14 months. Yeah. And I think that has to be really, like, put it on a banner, shout it from the world. I'm a survivor. Look at the resilience in humanity. Look at how so quickly we've come up with a vaccination. How so quickly we've been able to, like, considering how big COVID is, how quickly we've been able to open up schools again. We're like, I'm going out to a restaurant with my sister and my mom in June. Like, we're incredible. We keep going. We have this ordinary magic that just gets us getting back up. And no matter what, that sun rises and that sun sets every day. We just keep going. We're just incredible.
I would just say to people out there who are watching, if you are experiencing anxiety, and if you have, a lot of people have had difficulty sleeping over the last 14 months, not just because of worry, but because they've experienced things like nocturnal panic attacks. these all are known about, they're understood, you're not crazy, there is a reason for this happening, scientifically understood. And just that just brings me as well to the point that you make a specific point, Gillian, in your information of saying that you blend the scientific and the corporate. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when I was 18 and I didn't know what I wanted to do, I trained as an aromatherapist and I did Reiki training and all of this. And I would have been what my parents called a hippie. Not at all. But I liked my aromatherapy and my crystals and everything else. And when I began to train as a therapist and look into how the brain works, I found myself hungry for the science behind psychology, evolution of people, how our brains work, how you can have a cramp in your stomach and it could be caused by some emotional stress. When you actually look into the breakdown of our brains, the 3 different brain centers, and how our brains get to dictate on an unconscious level our mood, I definitely couldn't do the psychotherapy without bringing the brain and the neuroscience, the neuropsychology into it, and looking at, okay, what is the science behind evolution, how our wiring works, our parasympathetic responses. If you're working with anxiety, even to connect the belief about something with the actual body, with the nervous system, and how they can actually have a direct impact with each other. And this is not hippie stuff. This is actually hard science. And when I'm working with somebody in therapy, I like to bring in the hard science, because I think by explaining and helping somebody understand, I'm not going mad. I'm not losing my mind. Most people's biggest fear is going mad. And yet, when you look at how, I guess, our bodies or our unconscious minds communicate to us, it often triggers the sense of, I'm losing it. But that's science. Our body's trying to tell us something. Something's happening here that perhaps we can resolve if we do a bit of investigation or a bit of work. So I bring the science in first and foremost all of the time, even with the corporate training. If I'm talking about, hey, inclusion is lovely. It's a great word. It's the feel good. Let's all sit down together and belong and accept and make space for each other. But if you look at, even looking at the hard data, like companies with inclusive policies are more productive, have better financial results. The science speaks for itself. So sometimes somebody might say, oh, I don't really believe in therapy. It's not, I don't know who they are. It's not like therapy does exist. It is very science-based. It is something that is real. And I've always found myself to be a science-based therapist. And I think as I've gotten older, and then as an adult discovering that I'm autistic, it makes sense that I'm seeking out the bits that I can factually explain for me to make sense of it. Because whatever about me liking, like whatever,
the intuitive alternative therapies, you need the science bit too.
Yeah, if I like sitting in a drum circle, that's fine. That might be my own personal preference. I'm not going to say to a client anything that's not hard science that's going to help them on an individual level understand themselves better and put resources in place for them. Because if you go to Google and you Google like the top 10 things for stress, you'll get a list, but you're not going to know what's specific to you. Whereas working with somebody who understands the science and can help you understand yourself, you can make your own very unique top 10 things for stress that are unique to you and will work.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, I've often been quite, well, I mean, in our lives, we can experience both sides of the coin. If you're a highly intuitive person, which I would be, if you're highly intuitive, sometimes the corporate world of work, where it's, one size fits all at times, can be very alien to you and quite difficult to deal with. And then you've got other very successful entrepreneurs and international entrepreneurs who work on the complete opposite premise, and who are very creative and are aware that you have to be very creative. And it's just working out which is the environment that is the least toxic for you. I mean, for me, I have to work on my own because I need to stay away from toxic environments. But like yourself, I would be very, very into the science of something too. So I think if you can marry the alternative and the scientific together, then that's a great thing. And possibly there are more people able to do that. But trying to do what you were talking about there, which was then take the scientific and marry it with the corporate, and take that approach that you have, the scientific and the psychotherapy approach, and actually introduce it into the corporate world and have it make sense within that. That's not something people are doing enough.
No, it isn't. And one of the reasons, I guess, we won the award for being the inclusion agent that we are. There are many people out there doing diversity training. There are many people out there doing workplace wellness. And I have done research, and other people have done research and due diligence for me, but I don't yet see anybody else doing exactly what we're doing, because we're bringing science along with psychology, along with mental health, along with the actual sociology of diversity and inclusion. And it's just, I guess I've such a hunger for learning. I've such a passionate team. We're marrying a lot of different things that make sense. Like sociological, looking at how we interact as people and how that's driven by culture, looking at the science behind what makes, from a corporate perspective, what makes your balance sheets bigger. That's all really, it's not all, but that's company's primary focus. Of course it is. So if you can sell something to a company that shows this is good for business, it's good for people, it's good for mental health, and hey, it's a psychological need, we're like, it's a no-brainer.
What's your experience of companies and the types of pressure that they're putting on their employees at home, working from home? Is it being managed well, or is there?
No, it's not. And I think everybody has, and you're right with what you said there about the corporates, that toxic environment. Some people are doing a lot better being at home, but the work stress, everything is being communicated by email or by meetings, rather than just turning around to a colleague and saying, hey, will you pass me such and such? So tasks that should be even a small, quick task now have to be scheduled and arranged, and things are taking longer. And I don't think companies are really appreciating, by the time you email somebody and you've got 80 emails in a day and reading through them and then trying to schedule when to get back to people, when to do the work, it's not being managed well. Most people are working beyond, let's say, a 9 to 5, whereas going into the office, having the coffee station chats, the lunch kind of team meetings, the organic, natural communication that people, we're not meant to be isolated the way we are. And then people's mental health, trips to the supermarket, the stress, the anxiety, homeschooling children, sick parents, not being able to visit parents. In my own family, we had to, my grandmother's 90 next week, we had to put her into, well, my parents, she had to go into a home because she was not capable of independent living when COVID hit and because of lockdown. So even this, and I know many other families have had to go through similar, there's just so much stress. And some people, it suits them better to work from home, but not everybody. But now there's this whole thing, oh, we're back in the office from such a date after proving that we can work from home. And that's adding so much stress as well. This whole idea of, because I think people are going to integrate at their own pace. I don't think you can put a blanket date of September, everyone's to be back in the office. And I just think companies are not getting it. If you support your employees' mental health now, like the mental health has an impact on everything from productivity to turnover to longevity to the networks and workplaces. I think it has to be a primary investment for companies.
Yeah, and this is where I think that the tsunami is going to come your way very soon, and for people like you, because we haven't yet reached the point yet where people have actually found themselves back doing a 3-4 day, 5-day week again. And when they do, that's when suddenly they can have anxiety issues return. And we don't know what that's going to look like, but we definitely know it's on the way. So it's going to be it's going to be very, very busy for yourself. What would your advice be, Gillian, if you were to give 3 pieces of advice to people now who are, perhaps they're solo entrepreneurs, perhaps they've had to bite the bullet very quickly and suddenly go solo because of the pandemic, but you know, they're busy, it's suddenly happening, and they're struggling to cope?
Okay, first off, Ignore Instagram. Instagram is a liar. Everybody is having a really hard time and a bad time. Nobody has a perfect, happy life right now. Please stop comparing yourself with other people who seem to be doing well. Comparisonitis is just a big stick to beat yourself up with. You're not the only one who's suffering. Everybody is struggling. Everybody is. There are no exceptions. Okay? And I think that's so important, because the amount of people coming to me saying, oh, but so-and-so is thriving. I can't obviously tell you who my clients are. Nobody's thriving. Nobody is. The people who look like they're thriving also aren't. Okay. Reality check. So, and another thing then, self-care sometimes means tough love. You can have all of the champagne, bubble baths and chocolate bars in the world. That's pampering, not self-care. And I really don't mean to be a naysayer. I love my pampering. It's different. Self-care is sleep, getting to bed on time, no matter what, hydrating, eating healthily, not having the bubbles and the chocolate bar if that's what it takes. Self-care is tough love. Yes. And I think we need to really have a reality check around what self-care is, because there's this idea of treat yourself with self-care. Self-care is actually looking after yourself, putting your health, your well-being first and foremost. And self-care is not selfish when you do it in that respect. Some people self-care includes meditation. Some people self-care includes putting time in the diary for them. Some people self-care includes not replying to the text or answering the phone when your mother rings. So you need to mind yourself. And in doing that, I'd really suggest you look at what your boundaries are and what self-care looks like for you. The other thing is boundaries. Speaking of, everybody has a different sense of what a boundary is. If you don't know what your boundaries are, you're not going to know when someone breaks that boundary. And when it comes to COVID, a lot of us have had our boundaries triggered. I have had a friend who has very different beliefs around what COVID is than I do. We have been friends a long time. Our friendship has been very strained because I've had to hold very strong and firm boundaries around things like meeting up. And that's difficult. But if you don't know what your boundaries are, you're not going to be able to articulate the boundary to somebody else, and it'll just come across as something very different. Whereas if you can identify, say we're going back to the office, if you don't feel ready to return to office or group work until you are vaccinated, well, then that's a boundary for you. If you can really tune into where your boundaries are and map out if they're flexible or hard boundaries for you, you'll be able to articulate a lot better. And that's part of self-care. And I really think comparison, self-care and boundaries, if you can even just, there are three very personal and individual things. And that's why it's important to just do the reflection and do that work yourself.
I agree with you totally on that. And if you do have boundaries, I mean, now's the time to consider them. We've got the time. If you have those boundaries in place, you're less likely, it's not that you won't spin out of control, but you will regain control a lot more easily if you have those boundaries in place.
It's almost like being your own parent.
Yes, yes.
So sometimes you might feel like you want to be a big kid and go off and do the thing, and you nearly need to be your own parent and remind yourself, actually, look, is that healthy for you or is this healthy for you?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. No, listen, there's just one thing with regard to youth that I would like to come to now, just before we wrap up. And that is, you've been involved with the JCI. You're a partner with them now. Could you just explain to people what that is?
Yeah, I used to be the director of personal development with the JCI, which is the Junior Chamber International. And I also do a lot of youth work with Anua Academy. I'm a director with Anua Academy as well, which is emotional health for young people. As a therapist, for my own mental health, I no longer work with under 18s, but I am an advisor and a partner with companies and organizations who do. JCI is a peer-run organization that is a networking group for young professionals. So for young professionals, it's age 18 to 40, where it's peer learning, peer support, and peer networking. For people who want to advance and excel in their careers on a professional level, but learn from each other and really help each other. I guess this whole idea of pulling each other up the corporate ladder. And I gave a talk to JCI March or April, I think, last year, the very, very beginning of COVID, called From Panic to Professionalism. And in that, we were actually talking about how if you have the capacity at all to be a lighthouse to somebody else, now is the time. Not everybody has, and sometimes you might only be able to do that for a little time or part-time, and that's okay. But JCI really builds on this idea of making an impact on a community level to be better as a society and to be better as an individual.
And do you find, in your experience, has it been all talk, or does it actually work, this organization? Is it one of those that actually does what it says?
It's not all talk. Different, because it's member run. It will look different year on year as the members change, but that's what I loved about it. It's not all talk. Some of the projects that JCI have been involved in, that I've been involved in, is this idea of impacting community. So there would often be projects like even simple things like beach cleanups or litter clear ups or cleaning the canal, and then homeless services that we would go out around Christmas with backpacks for homeless people. So there's an element, and it's not that it's charity work, it's projects that we would take on to try and have that impact in society. So because it's member run, we decide what we do. We decide what that impact looks like. And it's not all talk. There are very good training programs that have been created, I guess, by the organization, by the more advanced and experienced, and I guess senator members. So people who've perhaps excelled in their career or past the age of 40 and are looking back, helping create these training programs that really do teach people how to have an impact in community and how to run projects.
See, that's very important, because this is what I still find is very difficult to identify, is which of all the ones that are saying how great they are and that are being promoted because there's money to promote them, which are actually good. This is almost a trial and error situation where you've got to actually be part of one of the communities to find out if it's true, if it's really true or not. So I totally agree with what you're saying there. And another network, if I can just bring it up now, this program is powered by the Women's Inspire organization. It's a network of women. The Women's Inspire Network, led by Samantha Kelly. She's the founder. She's also known as the Tweeting Goddess. And in a similar sort of way, I'd been involved with networks before, but it wasn't easy to find one that actually delivered on what they were saying. This is another one of those organizations, and they power our show on a Monday. And you're a member, aren't you, Gillian?
Yeah, I am. I really only started joining networks when I became self-employed. I didn't value or understand the importance of them, but I'm very social. I challenge all of the autism myths. I'm very social, very extroverted, love people, need friends, and going self-employed as a sole trader, shock to my system. Having said that, I wanted to protect the environments I hung around in, and joining women's networks for me, and JCI at the time, networks that make a difference, networks that support and lift each other up, like that, where there's a sense of community and genuine encouragement. I did look at some other networks and decided perhaps they're not for me, because it felt competitive or very sales driven. Whereas a network that is community-based, inspiring, like the tips in the name, but there is that support. I've met some incredible people through the networks I've joined in the last 3 years, and the Women's Inspire Network being one of them.
Yeah, and I think some of those other networks that I was involved with as well, they also they promoted an impulsiveness in you, which is the thing to resist right now, to be patient and to have a look at what you really need. Because sometimes you're being encouraged to sign up to platforms and to sign up to things that actually aren't going to be suitable for your business at all, and a waste of time. And although it's all about risk, we have to take a risk. We have to take the step and risk making mistakes, etc. At the same time, controlling the impulsiveness that can grow. You can be driven and you can be impulsive, and they're two totally different things.
They are, yeah, they are. And I think like that, the impulsivity, it takes away from that authentic connection.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely great talking to you today. Gillian Fagan Cully. You'll see her handles here. So she is Facebook at Acora Therapy, Twitter at Acora Therapy, all lowercase in that one, and Instagram Acora Therapy, all lowercase there. You're on LinkedIn as well?
I am Gillian Fagan.
Gillian Fagan.
Or Acora Therapy, you'll find me there.
You'll find her there as well. Absolutely wonderful talking to you today. Really great having you on. And listen, folks, if you're looking for anybody who can really help you, Gillian Fagan, obviously got a long waiting list at the moment, but gosh, what a great interview you've given. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I hope that we'll be in contact at some point in the next 6 months, because what I like to try and do is get back to people in 6 months' time and see how they're getting on in the pandemic and how the business is getting on. So I would hope that we could have another chat then, which would be
Fantastic.
Great.
Absolutely. Pleasure. I'm so inspired after talking to you. Lovely to just connect with another Women's Inspire Network member.
But you know, that's another thing, apart from, you know, the Women's Inspire Network, which is great to connect with other women, you know, from that point of view. But sometimes at the moment, we're missing just seeing another female face.
Yeah, and having an honest, open, authentic conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing to me about your experiences with PTSD.
Not at all. No, I tell you, do you know something? In the last 14 months, I just decided I wasn't going to hide it anymore. I'm just going to say it. You know, I've often said I'd rather be in a Cessna aircraft about 10,000 feet up with a pilot who has a panic attack and has a blueprint for dealing with it, than finding myself seated beside one who's never had one before in his life and has the first one on that flight with me.
Yeah, completely.
Because at least they know how to deal with it when they've had them loads of times before. And unfortunately, I am one of those as well. And listen, folks, if you're out there, don't be afraid to reach out. You have to reach out. And there are lots of people there who can help you. Gillian's one of them. But don't suffer alone. It's whatever starts has a middle and has a finish. And no matter how bad it feels, you will get through it. So all you solo entrepreneurs out there, tune in. We're on Mondays. The Women's Inspire people are being featured on Mondays, but also have a look on Thursdays as well, because we've got other local, national and international businesses coming on then too. Gillian Fagan Cully, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Miriam. Have a great week.
You too. Bye-bye, everybody.